I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Bioware is in a rough spot, and I think we all know that at this point. You may have heard that Electronic Arts just agreed to a $55 billion private deal by Saudi Arabia's public investment fund alongside Silver Lake and Affinity Partners. That's the biggest leveraged buyout gaming's ever seen. It's a mountain of money and a mountain of debt. More precisely, over $20 billion in debt that EA has to scrounge up cash for. That means that everyone under the EA banner from Respawn to Bioware suddenly has to start looking very efficient. We're now in a situation where you don't get to miss twice, and Bioware has been missing 3 consecutive times, and one has to ask how it's possible that EA still hasn't shut them down. To make things worse, Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, or PIF for short, has made the internet's collective eyebrows rocket into orbit. And the reason for that is, well, let's just say that their public image isn't exactly glowing. But here's the key part of this: PIF doesn't micromanage story direction, they micromanage results. If Mass Effect looks like a prestige safe bet, it will get space to breathe. If it looks risky, that leash gets real short, real fast, and logically speaking, EA will be looking at Bioware with a microscope from now on. And now that microscope is landing on a team that's already been through a lot. In August 2023, Bioware cut around 50 positions, and some of those developers later filed a lawsuit over severance pay. Now, it's not just morale that gets demolished by this type of turnover. It bleeds experience and institutional knowledge. The kind you only notice is missing when something catches fire and the one person who knows how to put it out isn't there anymore. Then came October 31st, 2024, Dragon Age: The Veilguard finally released. After years of silence, it felt like Bioware finally breathed out. But as we all know, the reception to Veilguard was very, and I do mean very, mixed. On one hand, you had reviewers who gave the game stellar praise, and on the other, a metric ton of gamers, both new players and old fans alike, felt like the game was anything but Dragon Age. There was this golden little nugget of a line that Skillup delivered in his review. Every interaction between the companions feels like a jar is in the room. And this quote has been immortalized when it comes to discourse surrounding Veilguard. It just felt way too safe, repetitive, and to many, it was simply bland. Now, whether you are a fan of Veilguard or not, fact of the matter is that the game was not really as big of a success EA wanted us to believe, with CEO Andrew Wilson saying that the game reached 1.5 million players across 3 months. And EA admitted that this was only half of what they were expecting, as in those numbers are even more inflated because EA didn't even mention actual sales, which is really the most important metric to look at, especially so for a game such as this. But the worst parts of all this is that Bioware desperately needed a win. A total blowout. But what they ended up with was a whimper. And yet somehow, Bioware is still standing. After all the layoffs, after 3 disappointing releases one after the other, they're still alive. Somehow? And that somehow, I think, is Mass Effect. But before I segue into this next part, I just want to remind you guys that if you head on over to my Patreon, you'll find exclusive videos, early access to video essays, and best of all, ad-free content, and all of this is available to patrons who pledge $5 a month and above. Link is down in the pinned comment below. Now, first and foremost, I think we have to put ourselves in EA's shoes here. If a studio you acquired releases 3 consecutive flops in a row, if you were any other studio, you'd shut that shit down faster than you can say live service pivot. At least that's what Xbox has been trying to teach us recently. At any rate, EA clearly still sees some form of value in Bioware because otherwise the studio would have been shut down the week following the PIF buyout. We would have heard some form of confirmation at this point that Bioware is on the chopping block, but we haven't. You see, I think the answer is pretty obvious here. Despite 3 consecutive failures, Bioware managed to squeeze in a remaster a few years ago, Mass Effect Legendary Edition. As far as I know, the remaster didn't take too much resources and time away from working on the other titles, and in the eyes of EA and the public, the Legendary Edition was a smashing success. Sure, it wasn't a perfect remaster and it introduced some issues that weren't present in the original trilogy, but on the upside, it introduced Mass Effect to a whole new generation of gamers and rekindled the fires in the hearts of us old veterans. The success of Mass Effect Legendary Edition was, in my opinion, a statement from gamers that Mass Effect is important to so many people and it's a franchise that quote-unquote modern gamers want to go back to. And I think EA looked at the response and said, yep, Mass Effect it is. And I even think that explained some of their reasoning behind giving the Mass Effect team the time of day but not the Dragon Age team. I think at some point, probably after the launch of Mass Effect Legendary Edition, EA realized that Mass Effect was their prime cash cow. I mean, Mass Effect is getting a live-action TV show. I think that proves that at least some people at EA realize the potential that Mass Effect has, especially so after EA's exclusivity deal with Lucasfilm ended, because now other studios are also making Star Wars games. You see, Mass Effect exists because Bioware first made Knights of the Old Republic. Mass Effect is essentially their own sci-fi franchise meant to stand toe-to-toe with Star Wars. Let's also not forget that there really is such a thing as Star Wars fatigue. Disney has consecutively been cranking out Star Wars content to such a degree that they even stated themselves that they overdid it. Now, if I were a reasonably intelligent head at EA, I would look at this and say, well, you know, we have a franchise that can compete with Star Wars and there's hunger for more. Now, of course, that's just speculation from my side, but by just looking at Mass Effect as an IP, you would have to be, well, pretty dumb not to realize the potential the franchise has. However, potential is all well and good, because what are the actual chances that that potential could come true? I mean, after Andromeda, Anthem, Veilguard, layoffs, and a public investment fund now owning EA, what are the chances that Mass Effect 5 could still turn out into something special? Well, if you're a regular on this channel, you probably already know why. Because there are actually some really good signs, and I'm not talking about the corporate PR fluff or vague promises of learning lessons. I mean tangible, verifiable stuff that suggests Mass Effect 5 might be the first time in a decade that Bioware finally has a fighting chance. Let's start with the obvious one, Mary DeMarle. If you don't know that name, you should. She's the narrative director they brought in back in 2022, and her track record reads like a masterclass in sci-fi writing. She's the mind behind Deus Ex Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, both of which handled player choice and consequence better than most modern RPGs even attempt to. And then she went on to write Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, which not only won Best Narrative at the Game Awards 2021, it single-handedly reminded everyone that writing can still carry a AAA game. And from what I've gathered, she's not just punching up dialogue, she's overseeing the entire narrative structure of the new game. So yeah, hiring her wasn't just a smart move, it was a brilliant move. But let's be fair here, it's not just about Mary DeMarle, there are genuinely some great talent on board here. Michael Gamble is still in charge, serving as project director, and under him you've got a lineup that reads like a who's who of old Bioware. We're talking Derek Watts, the original art director, Parrish Lay, the guy who helped define the cinematic tone of the trilogy, Preston Watamaniuk, one of the creative leads back in the day, and Dusty Everman, the man who literally designed the original Normandy. Yep, that ship that became every RPG fan's home for years. These are people who get it. They were there when this series was at its absolute peak, and they've come back because clearly they still care. And you don't rejoin a sinking ship out of nostalgia. You do it because you see a way to fix it. This isn't some new team fumbling around in Frostbite. This is Bioware trying to rebuild the house with the same people who originally drew the blueprints. So yeah, say what you want about Bioware's track record lately, but at least on paper, this is the strongest lineup they've had in years. And that's before we even talk about one of the most important decisions they've made in recent memory, the switch to Unreal Engine 5. Now this one is probably one of the most important and underrated changes happening behind the scenes, because for the first time in over a decade, Bioware is not fighting its own tools. They've officially dropped Frostbite and are now building Mass Effect 5 in Unreal Engine 5, which is pretty massive. Now I know, UE5 has had its ups and downs in recent years, but compared to Frostbite, I think this is the best case scenario that we could ask for. If you've followed Bioware's last few games, you already know how big of a deal this is. Frostbite was a nightmare. It was made for Battlefield, not for RPGs, and using it for story-driven games was like trying to film Interstellar using Microsoft Paint. All this to say, if we look at things logically, Bioware really does have a chance with Mass Effect 5. Now, whether it will be their last chance remains to be seen, but for now, time will tell, and this upcoming N7 day will prove whether this game is still alive and kicking, or if all of this has just been one long nostalgia trip. As always, thank you for watching. This has been Mr. Holton, signing off.